Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of the Red Death is one of the most famous short stories ever written. But did you know that there are two different versions of it? The story was originally published in 1842, and a revised edition was published in 1845. Since then, the story has been adapted and reimagined countless times. But which adaptations are the most faithful to Poe's work? And which adaptations contain the most stylish masks? Let's put on our evening wear, take our BCG vaccines, and find out. If you haven't read it, Poe's story goes like this. A horrible disease called the Red Death spreads through the land, causing the infected to bleed and die. In response, the Prince Prospero locks himself and 1,000 other aristocrats in his castle. There, they throw huge parties while the commoners continue to suffer. One night, during a masquerade ball, someone shows up wearing a mask that looks like the bloodied face of a corpse. The mysterious guest is revealed to be the Red Death itself, and everyone in the castle dies. Here's how Poe describes the Red Death personified. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. The mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. This gives us a good idea of how the Red Death should look. He should be wearing a funeral shroud or some other contemporary burial clothing, be wearing a mask that looks like a realistic human face, and be very, very bloody. As for the rest of the guests, it's less clear how they should be dressed, but we can try to get clues from the setting. Based on the name Prospero and the fact that Poe mentions improvisatore, a kind of spoken word poet, we can infer that the story takes place in Italy. We should therefore expect to see Italian influences in the clothing. The time setting is harder to pin down, but the presence of a pendulum clock in the story means it has to take place in the 17th century or later. And since the story takes place before its publication in 1842, that places us pretty solidly in the 18th century. We should therefore also expect to see an Enlightenment influence on the fashion. But considering the fantastical nature of the story, historical and geographic accuracy don't really matter. This is a fable after all. As Poe describes it, the clothes the dancers chose to wear, their costumes, were strange and wonderful. The dancers looked like the forms we might see in troubled dreams, and these, the dreams, danced softly through the rooms, taking the color of the rooms as they moved. Also, one thing I'm going to intentionally ignore in this analysis is the title of the story. The original title was The Masque of the Red Death, with mask spelled M-A-S-K. This likely refers to the mask worn by the Red Death. However, the revised title spells it M-A-S-Q-U-E. This spelling of masque is usually used to describe a party where royals put on amateur musical theater performances. Since nothing else about the story implies that the party guests are putting on a musical, and since the original title doesn't even use that spelling, I'm going to assume that's not what Poe meant us to picture. It's more likely that he used that spelling to emphasize the party as a whole rather than one piece of clothing. Or maybe he was using an archaic spelling to emphasize the old-timey setting. Either way, nobody's doing theater, so whether or not anybody looks like they're wearing a theater costume won't factor into my analysis. With that, the first adaptations I want to look at are illustrations. The story has been drawn and painted countless times, and I can't talk about every single interpretation, so let's quickly enjoy a slideshow of some favorites. The illustrations I do want to discuss are the ones used in Tales of Mystery and Imagination. Tales of Mystery and Imagination is the title of various collections of Poe's works that emphasize his legacy as a horror writer. Since that's the version of Poe that exists in the popular consciousness, it makes the most sense to me to look at illustrations from those publications. The first notable illustration is from Harry Clark's 1919 edition of the collection. This Red Death is drawn in black and white, so we can't tell if it's bloody, although the stippling on the hands implies decay. Strangely, there's a second human face beneath this Red Death's mask, while in the original story, the mask is untenanted by any tangible form. This Red Death also doesn't wear a shroud. Instead, he's wrapped in gauze like a mummy and wears a fringed patchwork cape. It's a beautiful illustration, but not a super accurate one. Another notable Tales of Mystery and Imagination illustration was done by Arthur Rackham in 1935. Rackham was most known for his work illustrating ballads and fairy tales, so he was the perfect person to reimagine Poe's fantastical writing. Rackham's version of the Red Death is very accurate to Poe's vision. It's shrouded, it has a human face, and it drips blood. Overall, a very good job. The Masque of the Red Death has also been adapted into many movies over the years. The first time was in 1919 with a silent film called Depict in Florence. This version of the Red Death doesn't appear as a man, but as a woman. She wears a tattered tunic and her hair is braided in 2 pigtails. She doesn't bear much resemblance to Poe's description, although the dark makeup under her eyes is very corpse-like. Notably, this version of the Red Death plays the violin as everyone dies, in a symbolic nod to her devilish nature. It's a unique interpretation, if not a super interesting one. The next filmed version of the Red Death is a 1964 adaptation directed by Roger Corman and costumed by Laura Nightingale. In this version, the Red Death spends most of his time wearing a floor-length red cloak. A red cloak is one of the most common ways to depict the Red Death, especially when paired with a skull-like mask. These sorts of depictions are more in line with the Grim Reaper than with Poe's description, and I've got to be honest, I'm not a fan of how uninspired they are. Basically, they're death, but red. If I'm being fair though, the cloak is practical from a storytelling standpoint, as Poe's original description doesn't mention how the back of the Red Death's head is concealed. In the Corman film, the Red Death at least doesn't wear a skull mask, but unfortunately, the mask he does wear is still lackluster. The main design elements are gold fringe and a gold brocade trim around the eyes, both of which look a bit simple. At other points in the film, the Red Death skips the mask and dons red makeup instead. This is more accurate to Poe's description, but it looks like team face paint rather than blood. It's strange how bad this costume looks, especially considering how so many of the other costumes in the film are beautiful examples of old Hollywood glamour. And it's not like Masque of the Red Death is the only horror film Nightingale ever costumed. She did extensive work for Hammer Films, and for 1970's The Vampire Lovers, which means we can thank her for solidifying the aesthetic of lesbian vampire movies. That being said, Nightingale also costumed the film The Hellfire Club, which features some very ugly red masks. So although she had many strengths as a designer, masks seem to have been her weakness. 25 years after Roger Corman's first Red Death movie was released, he produced a new adaptation. I couldn't find this movie anywhere online, and honestly I didn't feel like spending money on the DVD, so I can't say much about it. However, I did watch the trailer, and it seems like this Red Death also just wears a boring red cloak. Moving on. Also in 1989, another Masque of the Red Death film was released. This version, directed by Alan Birkinshaw and costumed by Diana Sellier, runs opposite to the 1964 version. Likely owing to the film's low budget, most of the characters wear tacky, generic-looking costumes. The Red Death, however, looks incredible, even if it doesn't look much like Poe's description. Its mask may be skull-shaped, but the red color and metallic accents make it stand out in a sea of similar skull designs. Unfortunately, things get weird when the Red Death is revealed to be this woman, who is far less intimidating without her mask. Poe's story has also been adapted into various animated shorts. The first of note is a Croatian film by Pavel Stalter, released in 1969. I can't overstate how beautiful this animation is. It combines paintings with collage to create a one-of-a-kind style. Like Die Pest in Florence and the Birkinshaw movie, this film's Red Death is a woman, a seductress that turns into a rotting corpse a la Mrs. Massey in The Shining. Her mask is a black Venetian Columbina bordered with pearls, with the Columbina style giving her that Italian look that's distinct to the story. Instead of a bloody shroud, this Red Death wears a ball gown, also decorated with pearls. The abundance of pearls backdates the look a bit, giving more of a Renaissance, Elizabethan flavor, but like I said, historical accuracy isn't really important, especially when you've got a Red Death that looks this beautiful. Another Red Death short film came as a segment of 2015's Extraordinary Tales, which is an animated anthology based on Poe's works. To pay homage to his adaptations of The Masque of the Red Death, Roger Corman voiced Prince Prospero in the Red Death section. Like the 1969 short, the animation in Extraordinary Tales is a beautiful mix of styles, in this case combining 2D and 3D animation. Unfortunately, this Red Death commits the offense of being just a red cloak with a skull mask, so it's uninteresting. The Red Death has also appeared on television, specifically in 2023's The Fall of the House of Usher. In this adaptation, which takes place in the modern day, the Red Death warns Prospero to shut down his party before acid is sprayed on the guests from fire sprinklers. Of course, Prospero doesn't listen, and the party ends in melty, gory chaos. This Red Death is our fourth female Red Death. She wears a skull mask and red hooded cape, which I of course find boring, but this ensemble has some details that make it stand out. Because the version goes in a more modern direction, the aesthetic takes notes from Versace. Costume designer Terry Anderson explained her process to IndieWire, saying, "To make the mask, I got an anatomically correct skull and stretched wet leather over that, and it dries and that becomes the mask that she wears. It's an Italian mask making process. The cape was this crazy piece of fabric that was $300 a yard, and I had to buy 3 yards of it, the most expensive fabric I ever bought. This Italian lace that was re-embroidered and beaded on top backed with gold silk. It was very, very heavy. Like I said, I'm not a fan of this costume overall, but I can appreciate the effort and thought that clearly went into it. The Red Death has also appeared in video games, starting with 1995's The Dark Eye. The game's plot takes notes from Poe stories and features a segment where you can watch an animated telling of the Masque of the Red Death. This Red Death drips blood, and although it wears a cloak, the cloak is a nice pale shroud-like color. However, he does have a boring skull face. One interesting feature of The Dark Eye is that its plot takes heavy inspiration from the Poe story Berenice. Berenice is about a man named Aegeus who decides to marry his cousin, which was not considered weird in the 1800s. In real life, Poe married his 13-year-old cousin Virginia when he was 27, which was considered weird in the 1800s. In fact, it's weird now. About a decade after her marriage, Virginia died of tuberculosis. TB was a major cause of death in Poe's family, also killing his mother, foster mother, and brother. Many speculate that the Red Death was inspired by tuberculosis, since coughing up blood can be a symptom of the disease. Another video game interpretation of the Red Death came in 2014, with the hidden object game Dark Tales, Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of the Red Death. This Red Death wears a red mask with a metallic ribbed pattern. The arched shape which exposes the mouth and chin is likely a nod to Commedia dell'arte masks from Italy. Outfit-wise, this Red Death dresses in typical old-timey fantasy garb, including a hood. That being said, I do appreciate the use of color in this interpretation. Most Red Deaths are, well, red, and this interpretation stands out with color-blocked sections of blue and green. Now, Dark Tales would be the last notable adaptation of the Red Death's costume, if it weren't for In 1909, Gaston Leroux published The Phantom of the Opera, which, like The Masque of the Red Death, is a work of Gothic fiction that has been adapted countless times. The story takes place at the Paris Opera House, where a masked phantom falls in love with a singer and causes all sorts of drama. At one point in the story, the phantom crashes a masquerade ball dressed as his own version of the Red Death. Quote, "It was a man dressed all in scarlet, with a huge hat and feathers on the top of a wonderful death's head. From his shoulders hung an immense red velvet cloak, which trailed along the floor like a king's train, and on this cloak was embroidered, in gold letters, which everyone read and repeated aloud, 'Don't touch me, I am Red Death stalking abroad.' Then one, greatly daring, did try to touch him, but a skeleton hand shot out of a crimson sleeve and violently seized the rash one's wrist." Since Leroux gave us a good idea of what this costume is supposed to look like, I want to examine some Phantom of the Opera adaptations and see how they reinterpreted it. Accuracy to Poe's vision doesn't matter here, so this segment will just be my subjective opinions. The first surviving adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera is a 1925 silent film starring Lon Chaney. This is also the first adaptation to feature the Red Death costume. The film uses color tinting during the masquerade scene, showing off the bright red of the fabric. Unfortunately, the original costume has either been destroyed or buried somewhere in the Universal archives, so there's no way of knowing if it was red in real life. There's also no way of knowing who made it, as there's no designer listed in the credits. Whoever was behind the costume though, their work is striking. Unfortunately, the costume is missing the skeleton hands from Leroux's description, but I don't mind the lack of gold lettering on the back, which probably would have looked tacky on film. The next on-screen depiction of the Phantom's Red Death costume came 6 decades later in 1988, with an animated television movie based on the book. This Red Death also skips the skeleton hands and gold lettering, instead telling the crowd not to touch him. The major detail this version adds is a skeletal bodysuit, sort of like what you might wear to a Halloween party. I like this. These sorts of costumes have been popular for centuries, worn to things like Mardi Gras and fancy dress parties, so it makes sense for him to wear it. 1 year later, another television movie was released, this one live action. Like the 2 previous adaptations, the Red Death costume features a red hat and skull-like mask. Instead of skeleton hands, this Phantom wears gloves, which are a nice little detail to help the look feel more complete. Another extra detail I appreciate is the little skull at the Phantom's lapel. It's things like that which can make a design stand out, so props to designer John Bloomfield. Of course, you can't talk about the Phantom of the Opera without talking about the musical, with Tony Award-winning costume design by Maria Björnson and masks made by Andy Fordham. Although one of the opera managers wears a skeletal bodysuit like the animated Phantom, the Phantom himself wears this incredible costume, every part of which is huge and over the top. Like the 1989 costume, it's the little details that stand out, such as the mask's articulated jaw. Björnson explained that opulence and darkness were her design goals, and I think she succeeded. Björnson also used real-life illustrations of balls at the Paris Opera for inspiration, although I don't know how much that informed the Phantom's costume specifically. Unfortunately, things went off the rails when the musical was adapted to film. The costumes were designed by Alexandra Byrne, who won an Oscar a few years later for her talent. But the Red Death costume is not representative of that talent. Why? Well, the outfit is supposed to be a showstopper that commands the attention of everyone at the Masquerade, but besides the cape, nothing about it feels over the top. Where are the big, bold pieces like the feathered hat? Where are the elements of Björnson's design like the puffed sleeves? Worst of all is the mask. From far away, there's nothing death-like about it, and it blends into the sea of black and white costumes. And why are all the other costumes black and white anyway? Is it to make the Phantom stand out in red? If so, there could still be blue, green, and yellow looks. It's supposed to be a costume party. This design just doesn't work for me. So, now that we've looked at all these interpretations, we finally have to decide, which Red Death is the best? In terms of accuracy to Poe, the Rackham illustration is a clear standout, and it deserves praise. But from a purely artistic perspective, I have to go with either the Croatian short film or the 1925 Lon Chaney film. Neither look as particularly accurate to Poe's vision, but they're both so beautiful. I mean, look at this animation. Look at the way Chaney moves. Are there any other adaptations of the Red Death you wanted me to talk about? Which version of this iconic costume is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. This episode's charity shoutout is the TB Alliance, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to the discovery, development, and delivery of better, fast-acting, and affordable tuberculosis drugs that are available to those who need them. Providing TB treatment to those in need is a great way to stop the kind of classism described in Poe's story. A link to donate is in the description.